Hello and welcome to another episode of Lectures of Fallen Wisdom. I am joined today by a listener. He was on last week. His name is the Immortal Bandit, Jordan. Jordan, are you there?
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm good. So last week we had a pretty long discussion and we went into a lot of things, and I'm sorry, I think I talked a little too much. I didn't get enough out of you. Now, this time...
No, it's all good, man.
I want you to... Because you mentioned something in a text this week that you were able to apply some of the stuff you learned from listening to the podcast in a real-life situation.
Yeah, man. I've been on it every day, and yeah, man. It's. I think we were talking about before, just consistency and just really being on top of it. And yeah, man.
Specifically, what is your first way of entry to keep on top of it, and what is it in your definition?
It would definitely have to be that bliss state that we're talking about. And
right.
I definitely can feel it when, hey, let me just get my dog out of the room. Keep seeing the clacking. Come on, buddy.
One thing about animals is you notice that they are in a constant bliss state.
Most of the time, yeah, if there's not fireworks or something popping off.
If there's no immediate danger, and humans used to be that way too for the most part, but we've been trained to be only in a bliss state in very short moments. And so that makes it, you can see why we've created all this technology, and that the earth wasn't enough for us. We had to create all these machines and things. It's because we lost the bliss state. And so naturally we're like trying to recreate it through our ingenuity. It's so stupid, but go ahead.
I think the first thing I recognize is, one, how I'm feeling. Like, let's just say when I wake up, is how I'm feeling. And that usually pertains to the circumstances of my life if I'm not in the bliss state, because I'm thinking about what has happened, what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, that whole train thought.
Anxiety.
Yeah, and it's not even that it's like deep anxiety, but it's definitely subconscious and conscious and underlying everything that you do, how you act. And my first thing that I like to check in with is the amount of breath that I'm actually taking in, and rather than when you're thinking, you're not, like you said before, actually breathing. You're kind of doing this like hovering of
right,
like
shallow.
a quarter of a, yeah, it's a good way to put it. Shallow breath where it's a quarter in, quarter out, quarter in, maybe even less than that. And I've gotten really good at checking in. I think we were talking about before, like a monitor system where I'm monitoring that level of breath. And dude, now even just getting off of, I've been off of caffeine and sugar for a minute, but the past like week or two, probably 2 weeks now, I've been off of bread completely. And I had a little bit of bread a couple nights ago, and I could almost visualize and see the train of thought coming in before it took over.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, man. As much as I had to, it wasn't like a big deal. I had to breathe it out and stuff. But the fact that it just, I saw it coming instead of it just embodying it and becoming it.
It's amazing, man. Because that, I mean, um, there's like some interesting passages in the Bible about bread, like man cannot live on bread alone. And people have taken that to be interpreted as just like food in general, and that you need like some kind of spiritual matter to feed on, which it does have that meaning. But I think it also is referring to bread. There's something about it that's so intoxicating. And what people don't realize is it is a crack version of food. It's so tasty, especially if you don't eat it for a while, you know, like, and then you come back to it, you're like, wow, this is really, and I can see like why people are addicted to it. Like a really good fresh baked bagel, you know, with butter. You know, it's just there's something like But the problem is, you trade that pleasurable experience for like a life of just seesaw emotions. And it's such a little thing. It's like no one would ever think a little bagel would be a big problem, but like it is. But it's so subtle. That's what I'm trying to say. It's like, and unless you're really fine tuned to it, you can't see it coming, and it's so almost seamless when it comes. Like all of a sudden, you'll just be really pissed about something, and you won't know why, and you won't be able to snap out of it. And it's like it's the crash. It's your blood sugar is swinging, and you know it just we're not set up for it. And so we've become like these very nervous creatures just because of the carbohydrates we eat. So you're not eating the bread. And so you're noticing mentally you're able to steer yourself, I mean, in the bliss state much easier, right?
It's almost like the bread puts on a mask or a layer that you have to dig through of what, let's say it's just emotion or something, like a cake of emotion, and then the thought you have to dig through. But when you don't have the bread, it's just a clear pathway. You go right to it. There's not a or maybe not right to it because I can see it coming, but I can see the bridge to the emotion, and I'm choosing not to take it, if that makes sense. Where the bread just, I don't know, maybe I'm not explaining this the right way, but it just feels like it's much harder to be even aware that the thought's coming, let alone that you're in it. But removing it seems like I can veer off the path of walking towards that thought.
That's good. So you can have a piece of bread now and then, because it's interesting that it used to be a sacrament, or that, you know, during the communion, it's like they're giving this bread to people, and it's supposed to be the bread of Christ, the body of Christ. And, you know, if that was like really just what all they gave to you, like a little piece like that, I almost think it, you know, there is a spiritual aspect to it, just like anything else, just like tobacco and marijuana and stuff like that. It's like whenever you use it in a ceremonial fashion, it has a different meaning completely. And so you think about, like, that's probably what bread is for, something like a sacrament of somebody's body. You're taking like a little piece and you're like tasting their spirit or something like that. I mean, that's what they're doing with the Christ Eucharist. And it's, you know, now that we just have this abundance of bread is just like everywhere, and bread is in everything. And most people eat, you know, a diet of, you know, I think 80% carbohydrates. It's weird. You see all like the requirements that the government puts out, and one of them is like 400 grams of carbohydrates. Like that's the normal amount, and that's like a lot. I mean, that's a shit ton of carbohydrates. And you can just see that the industry has written our food laws our food guidelines, and they've funded our universities. And there's this whole kind of counter against that. Like, no, the carbs are good. Like, you should, like, a whole food carb diet. It's just like, it's not much different to your body. Your body breaks it down just as fast. So it's better to just stay as much as possible like even keel with your blood sugar. It makes, if you have a specifically sensitive mind, and if you have a mind that doesn't that can easily be interrupted or messed up or emotified, the worst thing you can do is eat like some really fast blood sugar stuff. I mean, it's just, and it's crazy that like society has kind of limped along. I mean, it's such a violent society, and it's such discord, and to think that it's mainly our food that's doing it to us, it's like, God, and no one's saying anything. It's weird.
Yeah, no, it's I think it has to do with, you know, that food pyramid, and everything is based off the dollar, and
right,
you know,
this
they're not going to make money with it. This
society runs on junkies of different sorts. Food junkie is like the main one, right? It's just like all these different, like, I have to have this, I have to have that. You know, it's like people are really like, because they're not in the bliss state, they're trying to create the bliss state through food. And you can do that. I mean, for at least a meal, you know. But the thing is it's always blissful to eat. So no matter what you eat, when you're hungry, you're happy to have it, you know? So it's like the idea is like, I could never give up bread. Just like, well, your body could, your body would gladly give it up. It's your kind of like emotional attachment to comfort food that makes you want to, and you don't have the bliss state. You don't know what it is. You only get it, you know, when you're eating that like bowl of cereal. It's crazy, but it's like some people, they remember their childhood and they're just like, oh yeah, like a bowl of Fruit Loops. That's the bliss state. And it is for like a second, for a little while, for like 5 minutes while you watch a cartoon or something. Just
right.
But it's like your childhood was filled with the bliss state, and you had different experiences, intense experiences during those bliss states, and so you remember those. A lot of them surround sugar, surround something sweet you ate. And so, like during Christmas, it's like the gingerbread. Wow. Like shit is, you know,
the cider.
It's all just syrupy. You know, the thing about it is like a lot of people look at like an insect. The insect, like that's all they can really eat, and that's kind of what sugar is for. Sugar is like insect food. It's an interesting thing. Now, when you look at your breathing, I mean, there's like three things you're trying to like keep in focus. You look at your breathing, you look how you feel, and I think you kind of have to look how you look in the mirror. Like you can't, you know, it's kind of hard sometimes to see yourself in the mirror. And sometimes you need to take a photograph of yourself because you can kind of like see things when you do that. Or sometimes you got to take a photograph with like next to somebody else. And you start to just, if you can see something's not right, like you just don't look right. That's, you know, all you have to do is start breathing. And what's weird is that the picture itself will start to look better.
Right.
As you're breathing. In fact, the person in the picture will change, which proves to me often that, I was always talking about time travel, and like, you don't need to time travel to change, like, if you have a mistake that happened in your life and you want to really, you wish you could just time travel back, mentally, and like tap yourself on the shoulder and like stop you from making the mistake. Well, there's all these other parallel worlds where you didn't make that mistake, and you can go there. You can go to them. Like, so when I just recently, I borrowed a buddy's car, and I scraped the fuck out of it, like the side, just like,
damn,
going in a parking lot, and I fucked it up. And I was so mad with myself, man. I was like, man, I really just, it's going to cost like, thousands of dollars to fix. And I was just like, damn, it's a major fuck up. And I was like, and the guy's going to be pissed too. It's a nice car and everything. It's like, he's not going to be happy. I'll pay for it, whatever. But the point is, it's like, he probably won't accept me paying for it. He'll just be like, whatever, it's fine, and he'll eat it, and that hurts me because I'm like, oh man, like, it's just, I wish it didn't happen, right? So yeah. I start thinking like, man, like every time I think about this thing, every time I think about it happening, like I stop breathing, I kind of like clench up, and I'm like, man, like, and I'm like, well, there is a parallel world, like, where it didn't happen. Like I was about to take another turn in the lot. I could have gone that way, got out that way without fucking it up. And I remember that moment where I made that decision. So I was like, yeah, there's definitely like a parallel world where I didn't make this decision. So anytime, and since this thing is killing me, it's entering my brain like every 5 minutes because I'm so pissed about it. So I'm like, I create a little alarm clock using a thing like that. Like that's an opportunity. I mean, it's like such a thing that like bugs you. So it's popping up in your brain at every couple seconds, and you keep cringing about it, and so you can use that as like an alarm clock for your breath. So anytime I am now thinking about that scratch in the car, I just like start. And I'm thinking about it very often because it bothers me. So it's just like those kind of things, those mistakes now. What can happen is that if I breathe deep enough, I may enter a universe where that didn't even happen. I didn't scratch the car. Now, what would happen to my brain in that moment? My brain would also change. I would not remember that it happened. Even that's kind of how miracles never get recognized, because it's like your brain adjusts. Like if your brain could actually see the miracle, it would go insane, right? So it has to kind of shift with the reality. Your brain is part of the reality. It's not something separate from it. So it's not going to just be able to observe when certain changes take place. Same with somebody who dies. So somebody dies and you're very upset about it. Like if you breathe super deep and you get into a super high realm where you can transverse the different parallels, that person one day might be alive in your world again. Now, of course, you may have just had a dream that they died in that world. Like in that world, you're in that world now, right? So that he's still alive. He never died. But you woke up the night before, like, dreaming that he did. And so that's just kind of how your brain deals with it. But
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So when right before that moment happened, was there any second guessing, any like slip of time where you were like, oh, I should go that other way, but out of convenience or whatever the reason may have been, you did what you did and that happened. And then after, is there any recognition of a moment like that?
There doesn't necessarily have to be, but there really was in this case, because it was between me taking an Uber and borrowing my buddy's car. And I was like, well, I actually ordered the Uber, and I was like, I was all ready to take it, but then I was like, no, I'll just borrow this dude's car like real fast. And so I canceled the Uber, even like paid a penalty to cancel it. And in that moment, I was like, yeah, I should have took the Uber, whatever, what would happen. Now, I have faith also that the best thing happened. Why? Well, if not, then I'll go to the other parallel. But the point is, like, I understand why now you believe that the universe is going in a positive direction. So when bad things happen, you have to accept them as part of that positive direction, even though you don't like it in the moment. Have you heard of Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah.
Eckhart Tolle, he's the power of now. And he's always talk about acceptance. So that, like, when people they see a reality they don't like, their mind creates a resistance against it. And it's just like this, your mind says no to it, even though it's like right there. It's like you can't say no to something that exists. You have to just say yes to it, or it kind of eats you up. And that's what, like, most people are doing in their lives. They're like, they live in a state of saying no. And it's like, it's just friction. There's all kinds of friction and degeneration going down because of that. It's like cognitive dissonance every single day. So one of the first steps in getting over something is just like, when something happens that's not cool, like that riles you up, understand that it's part of the way that this whole thing unfolds. It has to happen. Stuff like that has to happen. So you accept it as that too, but you also accept it as a thing like, look, this is happening. If I resist it in my mind, I won't be able to deal with it. Once I accept it, I can deal with it. But if I'm constantly resisting it and saying no to it, almost like wanting to will it away, that's no good.
Right.
But
and that's based off of a projection that we have for ourselves for that reality, right?
I mean, it's more like we're fighting the reality with our own projection of what we think it should be, and I'm not. So when this thing happened with the scratch of the car, I was like so beating myself up. But then I was just like, look, this is actually worse than anything. Like, car can be repaired, but you're like fucking up your whole aura here now. And you understand that, like, it's because you're just resisting this thing that happened, this thing you didn't want to happen. And your mind is like, just like, ugh. You have to say, okay, great. Like, this thing got me mad. Like, this thing is going to be on my mind. I'm not going to be able to really banish this from my mind. Like, I'm not some Zen guy or like sociopath who could just be like, well, it doesn't concern me. I accept it. It's like, whatever. No, it's going to come up. Your emotions are like, have a mind of their own. Now, we've talked about limiting them by limiting your sugar balance, but still, you're going to have it. So it's perfect just to remind you to take a deep breath. So anytime you think of that mistake you made, makes you cringe, use it. It's a great reminder to keep the breathing up. And when you start to really just get on a roll with the breathing, and I'm sure you've seen this, where it's just going like for a long period of time, just constantly breathing, almost like a swimmer, like swimming through the earth instead of walking and just kind of treading water. You're like swimming like breaststrokes, you know. And we are, you know, aquatic apes. Like we were mostly living underwater for a long time. That's why we only have hair on our heads. Like we're not. We're on land very small amount of time compared to the length of time we were in the water. And that, you know, the way that we've been able to sustain ourselves on land is by creating like almost like an ocean of breathing inside of our lungs. Like we carry our ocean now inside of us. And we're like walking around on land, and we have to keep it churning. We almost are like creating our own atmosphere inside of our bodies. We're like a planet unto ourselves, and we have to keep the seasons, like the wind blowing and churning, for it to be a sustainable planet. And so it's just like that's what we're doing. So these little cataclysms that happen on the planet that is each of us, like these little mistakes, they're part of it because like they're like the catalyst. So now I'm like, I've had so many miracles just happen because I just used this fuck up, this crash, this little scrape of somebody's car. Like I used it. I was just like, use it all day. And I started like becoming like almost like a god because it bothered me so much that it was reminding me so much. So I was breathing more than I'd ever breathed in a long, long time. So the point I'm making is that like sometimes like positive reinforcement doesn't work as well as like negative because it doesn't come up in your brain as much. You know, when you're in the bliss state, it's easy to forget and and just fall out of it. So the thing is just like when you get poked by, that's what negative emotion is for, basically. Negative emotion is all of it is a reminder to breathe. So it has a purpose. So don't be so appalled when it actually comes in. That's kind of what I'm saying. Because like a lot of people are really just, they're pissed that they're pissed instead of just being pissed, you know?
Right. There's a level of acceptance that you were talking about that's, because I had an incident happen this weekend that was kind of similar with a job that I was kind of lined up for, and I had the owner of the business kind of hyping me up because he was a friend of a friend, and he was just had said all these things were going to be happening, whatever, and then the first day it just was the polar opposite, completely different picture was painted, and the next day I just didn't want to waste his time or anything, and I just said it wasn't for me, whatever, and later found out through the friend that he was super disappointed and kind of pissed off, and he had all this like stuff lined up for me apparently, but he almost was playing this game or whatever. And anyways, I felt like I had made a mistake by just not giving it a little bit more of just time in general, a chance for him, but just to see kind of where this endeavor goes, even though I had felt in the moment like it was just not supposed to happen. So I took that as, I just took it really hard, and the next couple of days were kind of rough, but then I got to this point where, like you were talking about, just accepting the choice that you made. And when I did that, when I like actually felt okay with that, with who I was by making that and not letting me beat myself up over the projection of my ego and what it wanted, there was this like taste of light that you kind of get when something really good happens in your life. And yeah, it was weird. It was like getting to the end of that on a good note. I almost was in the same place as if I got the opportunity, and I went through with it all. And there's just light regardless if you can, let go of everything you're holding on to that has to do with that moment. You kind of get what I'm saying?
Absolutely. But what the extra step that I'm adding here is that, look, you can say all you want that you accept it, but there's, you're going to have a couple waves coming in of non-acceptance, right? I mean, it's just when you're not paying attention, your mind is a thing of its own, and it likes to give you all sides of the argument, So while one side will be like, yes, my son must accept, there'll be another part to be like, yeah, but fuck. Now that person is such a useful person when it comes to the breathing. 'Cause it's like, if you could just lock that person in with, use that person as your reminder to breathe, you can get to a place where you did the different thing. You are, or it turns out that your tactic of how you did it was actually the genius way to go. There was a reason behind it. Like, you will get to a parallel universe either that makes that mistake like this, like it had to happen for this great thing to happen, and you see that later, or you can get to a parallel universe where you didn't even make the mistake, and your brain just adjusts, and you don't remember that it happened because it didn't in the parallel world that they're in. And that's all through oxygen. It's like your mind is like a quantum machine, and the more oxygen that can get into your mind, into your lungs, into your body, your mind starts to become like a quantum time machine. And it, instead of like going back in time and actually changing stuff, all it has to do is step sideways in time, and you ascend that way. You go to a better parallel universe. You notice that, like, if you're on like a great breathing pattern, like, you're getting all the green lights. You're getting all the walk signs. It's like, yeah. Have you ever gotten to that where you're just like, wow,
dude, all the time.
That's when you really see it, and sometimes you'll like be saying a word, and then on TV someone's saying the same word, and you were
like, talking about I think the 30 million year old man. He said something about lemons or something. You were like, or you could use a lemon for, I don't know what you were talking about. I forget, but I was driving and I saw a giant poster for like lemons. As soon as you said that, it was crazy.
There you go. It's stuff like that. You see that and you're like, okay, I'm on the right track. Like, I'm where I need to be. And
green flags.
Right. And when you start to see that there's like a lot of chaos, and like, even in the headline, like, even in like the world, like, if you just open up a paper and you see like some violence, like, there's something inside of you that created it. Like, it's a weird, like, so within, so without. Like, you can't entirely. That's why the bliss state is so important, because you're like one little atom, in this huge universe. But if you're vibrating bliss, you're going to help others vibrate bliss around you. And like, make no mistake, like, that's what you're here to do. Like, you're not here to give the truth to anyone. You're here to give the bliss state, like, however you can do it, but it's mainly by being blissful yourself. Like, you have to be in the bliss state to give the bliss state, But make no mistake, it's not just about you. It's not like, oh, well, you can just be in the bliss state and you don't have to think about creating the bliss state in others. I think that you need to do both. And in fact, if you're not trying like to increase the bliss state of other people, they're going to come back and fuck your bliss state. So it's almost like a defensive mechanism. They will come back at you if you're not on offense. Like you need to be on like a bliss offense. Now, what is that? That just means don't talk negative. Don't be negative to people. Don't give them your negative opinion. Don't express. I mean, this is from Gurdjieff. He's Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, like they're like some theosophists. Have you heard of them?
I'm not familiar now.
Yeah, they came around the time of Madame Blavatsky and like Rudolf Steiner. There's like the turn of the century, the thinkers. A lot of them are really smart. Aleister Crowley. And they all kind of talked and they had different ideas, but one of them was that just like it's really not a good idea to express negative emotions. Like, some people you need to talk it out with a therapist or a family friend, and sometimes you need to get it off. Like you need to say what it is and call it out. But if you're just kind of casually a negative charged person and saying negative things, even negative jokes, cynical jokes, you're poisoning the atmosphere, and you're doing it out of the not being in a bliss state. You're engaging in kind of gallows humor, and when you do that, or when you're just being negative, you're like, I'm cynical. You get like, even you hate, like people like hate Donald Trump, or something like that. Even that, it was like, do you understand that like you're only fucking yourself up if you hate a person. Like it's so bad for you cellularly, and for your bliss state, and for everyone else's bliss state, that it just doesn't even pay to talk about it. I mean, negative things are like, the tiger is going to come kill you now. Like, I can't. That's reality. It's negative, but it's reality, and it's like the only time you should ever communicate something negative is somebody's in immediate danger. But unless because you'd be like, hey, you shouldn't do that because that'll kill you. Okay, you're being negative, but but if you're just talking about politics, for example, and you're like, yeah, man, like Washington's like totally corrupt, man. Like, why does somebody need to hear that? Like, does that help them in any way? I don't think it does.
I don't think so.
But we're always like talking like that with people. Like we're criticizing things. We'll be like, yeah, that shit sucks. Like, I don't like that shit. Fuck that guy. Just that kind of talk. And it's like this weird thing where people kind of, they bond over it. They bond over negativity. But as they're bonding over negativity, like they're creating this kind of like weird bliss state out of negativity. Like they kind of talk about it with each other. Like, yeah, that dude's a dick. Like, fuck that dude. And I can understand like when you're doing that with somebody, like you're kind of having like a rapport with them, and you're joking and you're having fun, and it creates sort of a bliss state. But it's also just like seeding kind of the non-bliss down the road. Like there's really no reason to engage in it. Like you should just be like as positive and trying to cheer people up, right? So don't give them your cynical take. if just keep it to yourself, because you don't know you're right? If you think some shit's like totally corrupt and you're just like, fuck that, but you don't really know, like, why tell somebody that it is and get them convinced that it is? That's all I'm saying. So it's just like, why, if you really hate something, like, why convince somebody else to hate it too? Like,
some people need to be heard.
Yeah. What do you mean by
that? Everyone's got this little like screaming voice that just is dying to let everyone know how they feel, because they either can't let go of it themselves and they hold it emotionally, like, and physically, or I don't know. It just seems like it's almost a cry for help in the microest fashion, but it's because I've felt that way and I've done that, and it's just because I'm hurting inside. And it's the famous line: hurt people, and happy people don't. People that work on themselves and try and make themselves better, so when they're around others, they just lift everyone rather than either drag people along or just keep them at this like weird neutral ground. It's I don't know. It's interesting. There's a lot of people. Good.
No, I was just saying you can't. You're the pain that you're acknowledging. The minute that's kind of where like the philosophy that I'm trying to put forth here is like, that's where you should just intercede. Like, you don't need to go through this long, discussion with a psychiatrist. You just have to understand, like, I don't feel good. That's not supposed to be. So let me make myself feel better, and let me take some deep breaths. And you can see that even like the worst shit, you start to understand that like all you're here to do is deal with stuff. And the best way, and you're going to be in your best shape to deal with stuff if you have full oxygen. So anything that happens is just like, the minute you feel like shitty, it's not like, oh, I'm depressed. It's like, no, you're not breathing. It's like, oh, I'm angry. It's like, no, you're not breathing. It's like, oh, I'm really, I don't know. I'm scared. It's like, no, you're not breathing. And like, why don't psychiatrists do this? I guess they'd be out of business. I don't know.
Probably. And they also don't differentiate breathing, and because you tell that to most people and they're going to be like, I'm breathing. What are you talking about? I'm just, angry in this moment or whatever. And it's breathing is almost an action that we have to replace with those moments. Instead of the action of getting angry or whatever it may be, we just replace it with, we are breathing now instead of being angry.
Right. And so you just have your brain has to be really tuned to like negative emotion and just be like, and root it out. But at the same time, you can't be so shocked by it. Because if you consider yourself to be like a Zen person, right? And then negative emotion comes in, you kind of feel like a failure. You feel like, well, I thought I was this enlightened being, and I'm clearly not. But
right.
And that itself fucks you up. Just the idea that you don't have it together, and you start to unravel from that thought. And you have to understand that, like, you're here not to be like a Zen master that never gets upset. Like the Dalai Lama gets pissed. He stubs his toe, he gets mad. I mean, it's like, it happens. And it's not, the idea is not to be so on guard so it never happens and then get really mad when it does. It's your the way you are supposed to be is to just deal with it in the most effective way possible. And you can only do that if you're just like taking in a lot of oxygen the minute it happens and after and while you're thinking about it. And then like it's crazy how negative things that then when they happen to you are actually like they start to become an engine of breath so much more powerful than positive things happening to you. And so that's their place. That's why they exist. And that's why you shouldn't feel like, oh, how dare these things happen to me, the enlightened one. Like you should be just comfortable with the fact that they will happen, that you can't stop them, and that when they do, they're great opportunities to get to improve your breathing.
Just growth moments.
Yeah. Or just annoying moments. Like annoyance is the greatest breathing reminder ever.
Right.
Because it's very common. And it's also a reminder that you're not breathing. It's a reminder to breathe. It's a reminder that you weren't before, because else you wouldn't be annoyed. And it's the same. All the negative emotions are kind of like that. They're both the alarm and the fact that you're not breathing. So if you can just understand them that way, then it helps for you not to get carried away, because you're just like you catch it the minute you feel any kind of like non-sailing, non-flying, and just get yourself feeling really good with the oxygen, and you start to see that this is the natural state. It's like when you have like 5 or 6 or 7 huge deep breaths under your belt, then you can kind of see the world. And then like until then, your worldview is just wrong.
Yeah, and I mean, it can be even through, traumatic moments as well, where, something super intense that I like to call like real life moments, where it's almost this primal instinct that kicks in. I mean, it doesn't kick in, and it kicks in, but then you have the option to breathe and hone in with it, or, lose control and have a panic attack. And, I think it can be used in those settings as well, rather than, just everyday life stuff. You can get that in a super intense moment. I feel like
talk about it, because you had a moment like that, right?
Yeah, that's I think Thursday. Yeah, I was shooting a music video for one of my songs I'm putting out next year, and we were taking a lunch break, and this is in like Palm Springs, and we got Chipotle, and we're leaving Chipotle, and we're looking on the maps for this kind of mountain area to go shoot at for the last scene, and this probably over 200 pounds, probably like 250 pounds, 80-year-old man, at least 80 years old, maybe older, was walking our direction as we're leaving. He's kind of going towards the center, this little outdoor food center. And I don't know, when they were making the sidewalks there or something, they messed up on this one part, and there was this little lip that it was off kiltered, and I feel like a lot of people could trip on it. And anyways, he's walking past us, and this dude trips on the little cement ledge thing and straight up just face plants into the cement and takes his whole weight, everything, nothing, no arms blocking or anything, just from straight up moving forward to moving faster into the cement. And
ouch.
Yeah, man. And, I'm in the complete opposite state at this point. I just ate, digesting. I'm like, not fully locked in with my brain, just because food has just been put through my whole body. And we're kind of just like taking a breather before we go back out there. And this super intense moment happens in front of us. And I'm with my buddy, Sean, who is filming. And so this guy falls, and I don't know if you ever, you have to have in any movie, whenever you hear someone's head getting like caved in, that sound, that like fruit smashing kind of sound, I heard that in real life. Oh. And when I heard that, dude, it set off something in my entire body that was like, this is a real moment. This is an intense, real moment that you now need to be on guard for, if anything. And I'm kind of behind him because he landed and then he rolled over on his right shoulder. So I'm like looking at his back, and I walk over, and this dude has just a giant pool of blood on the cement around his head, and he's got this insane gash above his right eyebrow that is probably like 3 inches, 3 inches in height, and then probably like, I don't know, 4 inches wide. And I could fit like probably half of my fingers inside. I could like see inside his head, like the tissue and everything. And it looked like someone was pouring a cup of blood out, just out of a cup. That's how fast it was coming out. And it was in that moment, I had to choose to, it wasn't even a choice. Something locked in where I started breathing really deep. The first thing that came to my brain was that amount of blood that quick, like 911 for sure. So I call 911 in like a minute, get off the phone with them. I pull out this face mask I had. I put it up against his head. I'm trying to like get him to sit up, but he says he can't get up and doesn't want to move. And I'm just like talking to him as I have this face mask pressed up against his head, just trying to stop the bleeding. I told my buddy to go get rags from Chipotle, and he got some clean rags, and I put that up against his head, and I'm just waiting for the paramedics to come. And this whole time is just like, breathe, lock in. Okay, what's happening? Okay, breathe. Okay, lock in. What's happening? And it was, I don't know, man. It was
like you slowed down.
It was a crazy
time.
Yeah, dude. It slowed down so much, but then I know it slowed down because as soon as the paramedics came and they grabbed him, they wrapped him up real quick. They gave him a head wrap and a neck brace, and I'm pretty sure he's okay, but they put him in the stretcher and wheeled him off. But I lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Right before? Yeah, 100%. What was I saying right before that, though?
You said that they slowed down time?
Oh, yeah, right. So as soon as they took over and I stepped back, then I felt all the senses, all the sensory came back, and I like got super nauseous. I almost threw up. I was lightheaded. I had to like sit down just from that experience. I've never seen that amount of blood in one sitting in real life. And it was just gnarly, dude. But
yeah, you stopped breathing. You let go of your breathing in that moment, and then you got nauseous. If you kept breathing through that, you probably would have been fine.
Yeah, it was
like the minute you stopped breathing,
like,
you puked.
I felt, yeah, almost, and I felt that like time wheel speed up. Like I don't know, it was like, okay, I'm back here. What just happened? Kind of feeling.
Right, you went back to normal time from like because the negative event spurred this like basically sacred breathing on your part. The minute you came out of your sacred breathing routine and back into normal kind of regular breathing, it was just like it's almost like coming to a halt, just like, wow, like you just kind of see everything, and you're right, it just like registers as a fast event instead of a slow event at that moment, and then you get nauseous. I've seen that happen. Yeah. Especially a lot of people who have been in accidents report that kind of experience, especially if they're alert during the accident. A lot of people, when there's something that happens when you get into a heightened state, when and it helps us when predators are after us, we become super alert. I mean, it's from the adrenaline that gets dumped into us. And that can, some people hyperventilate from that and they have a complete nervous breakdown from it. But if you're, most people can tap into some serious, it's in moments like that where people learn these principles just from, being in an accident. Sometimes they learn the way to just slow down time with their breathing. Like it happens because their instincts do it for them, and then they learn that way. So that's why adversity often teaches people to be super chill all the time, and that's what's the benefit of it. So it's like everything negative, it's forming you in a way that can either destroy you or make you much better. And that's, and without the risk of destruction, there would be no reward of enlightenment afterward. So it's important that, like, let's just say there was a parallel universe where, and there probably was, where you just kind of puked right away and you got all nauseous right away and you just didn't want to deal with it, and you just kind of let someone else deal with it,
I just passed out and I hit my own head and we're both laying there.
Well, that, or you just kind of you're like, someone will help him, but it's not going to be me.
Dude, there was people, it was crazy when I was holding his head and I had a moment to kind of tap back in. I'm looking around. There was just people kind of just standing around, and not one single person asked if they could help. I thought it was kind of crazy, but I think they weren't
conscious at the time.
Dude.
They were in a state of total unconsciousness. For them, time was moving super fast. So it's like you're watching somebody just kind of still while you're doing all these moves. You're just seeing people stunned around you, and they're not breathing, and you are. So you're living in two different worlds completely. But that's fascinating, man. So I'm glad to hear that these lectures save lives.
100%, man. 100%.
Now, when you're... Go ahead.
No, I was going to, just on that last note, I think when, working on breathing definitely prepared me to just go into that mode instinctively. But when the next time something like that happens, I think I'll be even more conscious to tap into that breathing rather than what do I do, or have that two-pass choice moment rather than just one pass. I feel like there, like you said, there's you learn something from that moment and you take it, and I feel like I could definitely tap back into that quicker and almost choose it next time. Yeah.
Well, it reinforces itself every time you do use it. I mean, it happens in the opposite direction too. Some people get results out of completely bugging out, not breathing, and they get a positive result out of it in 1 out of 10 times. But that's enough where they think it works. People who get mad to get their way, it can work. People don't want to deal with an angry person. They're just all right, here, take it. You can have it. So you become very good at showing anger to get what you want. And the problem with it is that it by definition is you coming out of the bliss state to get what you want. It's like so counterproductive to why you're here, what your cells want, what everything in the universe wants. But you get what you want in that one moment, in that ego moment. And so you can get reinforced in that direction. So similarly, if you're finding a way to get into the bliss state, even in the most high tense situations, that becomes a muscle, and you're more apt for that to happen again. So it's like you're always creating your next, the next action with the action before. That's why like the cold shower thing, to me, has taught me the gap time between like emotion and choice. And I start to understand like where that gap time is, and it allows you to intervene. There's just like a little gap. It's very quick, but if you miss it, you're in the emotion and it's carrying you away, and you can't intervene.
100%.
So little things that you can do. The more you exercise willpower, I've noticed, the more powerful you're able to intervene in gap time, and the less you engage in willpower, it's harder. And I don't know why, but so little things like forcing yourself to go into a cold shower, or fasting, or
I think
refraining.
it's that muscle, man.
Huh?
I think it's that muscle that you're talking about. It's just like taking, anyone that's never lifted a weight in their entire life, and they go and try and lift a 75-pound dumbbell. There's a pretty good chance there's no way they're going to be able to do it, or at least like 5 solid reps. It's the same thing with this willpower muscle. You have to train it. And I know that gap you're talking about, like as soon as that cold water hits you, you have the choice right there to just stay calm and breathe like you do like I do in the sauna, or I can just start shaking and just like really be more into the physical than my head, and throw some boxing punches in the shower just to warm up however fast I need to. And I think it's just working that muscle and training it. And the more I do it, the every day kind of repetition, that gap that I feel in that moment, I seem to have more time as I progress. It seems like instead of it being a couple seconds of you have this moment to tap in, it's more like you can kind of like freak out for a second, but you have like 10 seconds now to like really, dive into it.
Yeah, it definitely affects you. And now even like refraining from eating bread, it's like that's a good willpower technique in and of itself. It just, once you train your willpower, then your willpower becomes stronger in moments where you need it. That's, I think, what it is.
And also you become aware of the level, or just the levels that there are. Because when you're not doing that stuff, you think you're at your limit, or you think that, this is the best I can feel or whatever. But I don't know, there's no better feeling than coming out of that cold shower and realizing like how good you actually feel, and that it was levels above how you were feeling before you were in it. And I think people are just unaware of those levels.
Well, that's another thing, is that when you put yourself in voluntary discomfort, it gives you a perspective shift, so that when you come back to normal comfort, which is just normalcy, you see it differently. You're like, wow, like the absence of discomfort is bliss. And most people don't see it that way. They think that bliss is something much more mysterious, but it's not. It's the absence of discomfort, and it's the acknowledgement of that is the bliss state.
But you have to be aware of that discomfort, right? It's like you have to know that you have to know the feeling of discomfort, so when you're not feeling it, there's gratitude for that feeling, right?
Right. Like you give yourself a taste of bitter, so then when you eat something sweet, which is just normalcy, it's so sweet.
You're like, oh, this isn't bitter.
So great.
Yeah.
And that's life, is like training yourself to appreciate it at every moment. And that doesn't mean being like some kind of delusional person, you know? It's like genuinely just seeing, like, look, if I'm not feeling any pain right now, there's no reason why I shouldn't just like be in awe of that and be like, wow, this is the greatest feeling of all time. But instead, people are just kind of like bored with it, the feeling of no pain. They're just like, yeah, I don't feel any pain, but I'm bored, or I'm depressed, or I'm
right. And the only time they feel that is maybe a week after that injury, and then it slowly fades away like a memory.
Right. Like, or somebody feels, like that's the thing, is most people don't allow themselves to feel any discomfort. And that's like kind of it's better to find controlled versions of discomfort that you can engage in than to wait for one to come along that you didn't create. Because when that one comes along, you're not as ready for it. And yeah, it might teach you something, but if it's a pretty high price you start having to pay. To go into a cold shower is such a low price, but you get paid so much out of it.
For real.
Now, like, you might end up like steering your car off the road during the winter storm and going into an ice lake. You know, that's going to teach you something. But it's not controlled, and it's dangerous. And it's going to teach you about almost the same thing that a cold shower would.
Yeah,
but
maybe
without the risk.
Teach you to put chains on your tires. I don't know.
I mean, the whole thing is to train you to have willpower, to be able to exercise your will. What most people are doing right now is just, they're not free. You know, they're automatons. They're reacting to their environment in a very determined way, and they think they're exercising choice, but they're really just letting ego autopilot them.
Mm-hmm.
And once you let ego autopilot you, it feels free. It feels like, yeah, my ego's in charge. Like he's making the decisions, and he's making very selfish ones, but they're free, goddammit. But they're not. They're very limited. You know, the ego is such a spiritually stupid mind inside of you. It's like, doesn't understand the big picture at all. So whenever that autopilot is on, you're not free at all. You're not exercising willpower at all. And it's funny because, like, there's no way people want to rely on. They want to rely on. How can I say this? They think that their willpower can get them to just do things every day. They think that they can just, like, for, how you make a plan. Like you'll be like, all right, I'm going to do 100 push-ups a day. And they think that just by making that plan, that they're just going to be able to do that every day. They think, yeah, of course, I'm going to do this.
Right.
And the day that you come up with that idea, that's what I was trying to say. People think that that inspiration is the thing that they should rely upon to keep going and do things. And it's really not. It's willpower. Power is the thing that you need. Inspiration is fucking bullshit. It's great when you get it, but if you try to rely on it, it might not come. It's like, it depends on how you feel. If you don't feel that great, it's not going to come. And it's not something that you can rely upon. Like you need to rely upon a consistent practice of willpower that develops into a habit, and that just like even at your worst moments, you're still performing this habit, and by virtue of your sheer will, you're still doing it, but not by virtue of inspiration. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but like you're an artist, and you know what I mean. Like you can't.
No, I get what you're saying.
You can't try to produce art just waiting for yourself to be inspired. It's like you could go years.
They call it like writer's block, and it's something I just don't believe in, because I feel like at least half the times I sit down to make music, I've either had to, or I don't know, half the time I'm stoked to get in there and just want to have fun, and the other time is, like a grind, but I'm pushing myself to get in there, and knowing that if I just show up, something will happen. But a lot of people, they're in this writer's block stage or whatever, this phase, they don't even, look at the studio or think about it. Or whatever it might be that their art is. They stay away from it until this feeling of light or whatever comes through that may not come for a really long time.
For years. Because it's like you never let it... the way you create those inspirations is by doing shit when you're not inspired, and then that creates the momentum. And people forget that. They think that their inspiration came first, and it's like the action, it's like the will, it's the habit that you've created.
That's alchemy.
Like, yeah. Then inspiration comes out of that. Like you create a vehicle for inspiration by creating a habit of practice that translates into feeling great and feeling, and when you see yourself creating things, it makes you more creative than if you're just like brooding on what you're going to create and never creating and never trying to create. That actually has the opposite effect. Makes you less apt to create anything. So you have to see yourself creating, see yourself doing like a little bit every day instead of trying to do like a lot in like a week.
I just tell people to show up. That's one of my mantras, is if you show up, the rest will happen. It may not be, the best thing you've ever made or whatever, but at least you made something, and I guarantee that next time you go in there, it'll be really good. And it's just about showing up and
right, putting in the time and giving yourself.
Yeah.
So what I do is like in terms of writing, like in writing songs, I'm just like, look, you have a half an hour, like write 4 lines, whatever. Just do it. Write 1 line a day. Like if you just did 1 line a day, you would write like 10 lines, 20 lines, sometimes 3 songs. It helps to make the goal as small as possible. Like I do I have a 1 push-up a day. I got it from that book, that Mini Habits book. It's brilliant. 1 push-up a day
Nice.
is my workout routine, and it's just like I do 50 push-ups and a bunch of sit-ups and pull-ups. I end up doing it more, but
that one gets you in it.
Yeah, but if I do 1, I know that by the law of thermodynamics, an object that is in motion will stay in motion. And so I know that with writing, I do 1 line of rap, 1 line of, I'm like, I'll listen to 1 beat. I'm always scouring the internet for good beats. That's a practice unto itself, and it's a hassle because you have to go through so many goddamn beats. But you're like, I'll listen to a couple, listen to 1. And then you end up listening to like 30. If you go into it saying, oh, I'll listen to 30, you won't listen to even 1. Because there's something in your mind that fights against you whenever you try to make these grand resolutions. Like, there's something in your mind that's just like, no, wants to rebel. So when you say, oh, I'm going to breathe all the time, I'm going to make sure I'm always breathing, there's something in your mind that's like, that's stupid. Like, you don't need to do that. You're always fighting yourself. So you always are going to have opposition because your brain is fundamentally like rebellious.
I think it's good because you're choosing a place to start. A lot of people, they make that grand decision in their head that they're going to do all these things or do this crazy diet, and they have the end in sight, but they have no idea how to start or haven't even thought about how they're going to start. And I think it's cool that, you're just doing just do 1 because that's the start. And as soon as you start, it's like the ball starts rolling down the hill.
Right. Everything's like, but the thing is that you can just kind of get by in life by just starting. And you'd be surprised, like, how much you get done, how much you feel accomplished. Because there's been days where I've just done the 1 push-up. And I've just been like, hey, I'm keeping this up. It's a habit, whatever. There's been days when I've written just like 1 line of song. And it's just, at least I did that 1 line though. And it's very rare that I do just 1 line. But I'm just saying, like, sometimes just to prove to myself that I'm still doing it. Like, if a friend dies, like sometimes like you're in terrible life situation and you're just like, well, am I going to do my 1 push-up? It's like, fuck yeah, I'm going to do my 1 push-up. I'm going to do all of them. I'm not going to let this change me. Change the trajectory that you're on. So habit, it turns out, is the key to like blissful life. It's like habit and willpower versus relying on inspiration. Most people, they want to rely on inspiration. It's just like, that's why they can't follow through. So one day they'll be like breathing like a motherfucker because they're inspired to do so by seeing how great it is and seeing how it works. The next day they forget it and they're just like live their life just the normal way again, and they just see it's terrible. The thing about it is, like, the more oxygen you're putting in, like the more like the goddess is like repaying you. Like the goddess is like wants you to breathe. The goddess wants you to take in a ton of oxygen, and she will give you like your wildest dreams. You think reality is limiting you. It's like reality doesn't exist. Reality is a malleable thing. But you need to be like a sorcerer instead of a human. And you can only be a sorcerer if you're like taking in these deep breaths. Now, we've talked about breathing all day. Talk about what your life was like when you came to this Lectures of Fallen Wisdom, like what other things were you kind of into, or was this your first kind of look at that kind of talking, or where were you in your development?
I'd definitely been meditating and breathing for a while before that, and just into the whole air quotes spiritual world. And I was just trying to find more information about just, the deep stuff, not the surface spirit world, and just the whole like yogi world it's cool, but I felt like I just was looking at it through a different lens. And like I said, man, I was reading occult books, on like black magic and crazy shit, and I was just trying to find. I was getting into podcasts, and I was trying to just find like podcasts talking about stuff like that. And I typed in occult on the podcast search engine thing, and this popped up in the picture. I think it's Alex Gray, right, for your cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I was like, oh shit, like, all right, like, I don't know, something just like drew me in. And then what you were talking about, how you were talking about it, and just, I don't know, you had this like street guru vibe, and I was about it. And yeah, man, I started really like resonating with what you were talking about, and then really started implementing it. And I know it really works because, just like everyone, we go in waves of working on ourselves, and then maybe something really good happens, and then we kind of get lazy and whatever. And every time I get back into it, because I've been out of the self-help wave or whatever, there's always this like realignment, like, oh, okay, full circled back to here now, but now it's new knowledge, and I just had to get back to what I was doing. But every time I do that, I had to get back to what I was doing thing, I always find new levels, and there's more knowledge that gets unraveled. And but yeah, man, consistency, even if it's, this is my meditation breathing journey has been over like 7 years now, and I feel really in the last year, at least the last year, I've like really broken into a new realm. And that took work, that took willpower, that took consistency. And yeah, man, it's definitely not something that, light switch on overnight. And like you said, people will breathe all day because they're super inspired, because they saw something or heard something, and then the next day they get tested, and they go right back to where they were, even if it could be even a worse reaction. And it takes a week or two to get back to just having that moment to think about breathing again. And yeah, I just think that consistency is something that people should try and keep in the back of their head with anything that bleeds into your existence, how you operate and how you walk and breathe. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a good thing to do is that realize that if you don't feel awesome, you haven't been breathing enough. You've been breathing shallow. And so what you need to do is learn how to basically walk and chew gum at the same time. So what happens is people get caught up with life, and their breathing goes down to a trickle, because life can create anxiety, create fear, And whenever our minds are actively engaged and we're not fully conscious, our breathing slows down to nothing. And that also impairs our ability to think. It impairs all these processes in our body, and it also fucks up our emotions, makes them very negative. So you just have to be kind of like understanding that, like, just learn how to, I mean, just sit home and fucking watch TV all day. If you need to do that, learn how to breathe, and then try just one little thing, like go to the store, buy something, and just make sure you breathe the whole time. Like, and see how many times you stop. Just doing something really rudimentary. Then you start to see how hard it is for people to do that, like when they're just going to work, or if they're hanging out with friends, or, you know, just something more complex. So you build yourself up to that. Like, you like first establish your breathing, like without anyone around. Like, you should basically, like, until you master breathing, you shouldn't hang out with anybody. Because they're just going to interrupt you. Yeah. But once I think the first thing you do is, like, spend a long time alone. And you probably did this. You had to spend a long time alone just to, like, get your breathing pattern down. Then you did little actions here and there. Like, so the first thing you did for a while, and I don't know if you did this. This is how I did it. I was like, I'm just going to spend all this
for
week.
Sure.
Yeah, like, I'm just not going to hang out with anyone. I'm just going to fucking breathe. I one time I just, like, watched TV all day, watched like 5 movies, and I was just like, I mean, I went to the theater and I had, like, this breathing counter, and I was, like, counting how many times I breathed, and I was, like, trying to get up to a certain number. I was like, I'm going to get up to 5,000 today, you know, and I was just, like, my finger on this thing, just countering, and I was just doing all kinds of, I mean, trying to figure out different ways just to, like, train my unconscious self to take deep breaths. And then I started doing more complex actions. Pretty soon I could do anything, hang out with anyone, and it doesn't matter. Like, somebody who's shouting at me in my face, like, I'm breathing perfectly fine. So that's a huge insulation against. But I also found that the diet was very difficult when I was eating carbohydrates to maintain that. Like, I would inevitably, like, get shaken off it very much more often. So the keto kind of lifestyle, like, was very key for that. And the fasting and just maintaining a low carb diet, basically a no carb diet. You know, you can't avoid certains, but, like, anything that's going to swing your blood sugar, like, dramatically, it's just out. It's just not worth it. It's just like, you're so much better off. So the first thing you got to do is kind of, like, get that thing off. Like, we can talk about breathing till we're literally just blue in the face, no pun intended. But the idea is that there is no way to get there, like, without a diet change. If you try to do it without the diet change, you're gonna have limited success. You will have some.
It just makes the work 10 times harder.
Now, you can have fun now and then. I personally think that people who cheat in terms of eating, like, they're like, oh, sometimes they'll have this thing. I mean, you're just gonna have to, like what happened with you. You ate the bread and then you saw what it was doing to you before it actually did it. You know, that, you know, you can learn from that, but why even deal with it? Right?
Yeah, I think I don't know, we have a thing with mouth pleasure that seems to override all the senses. It's crazy. But if you take out all that stuff, you know, for a decent amount of time, let's say 2 weeks, and then you go back and you have that little piece of bread, it's much easier to recover from that physically and emotionally than if you never did it all. And it's like you're just constantly layering on different layers of emotions. And once you remove all the layers and then you just put one layer on, it's super easy to take that one layer off.
Right. Because, when you're just like living a very carbohydrate-rich diet, you're just like creating all these different crisscrossing emotions. You can't keep track of them. Like, and it's weird how that's how our body interprets low blood sugar. It's like it interprets it as a thought. It's usually a negative thought. And it just comes into our head, and we think it's reality. And it's a great way to understand it is just to say, like, all right, we were not suited to this. Like, we didn't develop genetically to eat this way. And we are one of the oldest species, really. I mean, we've been walking this earth in different forms for a long time. This intelligent version of ourselves. Now, when you look at the immortality thing and you try to explain that to somebody, first of all, do you try? I do. I don't care.
I used to. But it's like you were saying earlier, and it's even in the book I'm reading right now that I was showing you over the text. They say you can't force anyone into the life. You can't, you can't preach it. All you can do is just act and just show by your actions. And you can drop hints and stuff just by how you respond or whatever, but people got to get there on their own. I got here because I chose this for myself. I wanted to grow. I wanted to dive deeper into myself. It was a self-realization journey that I've been on forever. Some people don't ever want to take that.
Do you notice anybody else, though, seriously talking about this physical immortality?
No.
Yeah. I was surprised. Because, I'm like, why wouldn't we want to talk about that?
But what you said about Jesus and or not Jesus, about the Bible and how people lived to 300 Abraham and all these guys, because they weren't eating the shit that's in all our food, and it makes sense. And I thought about it, and I'm like, that actually might be a thing if that was 100% of the time, or at least 99.9% of the time. If you were on it, you could possibly do that.
Well, that's one thing. I mean, these people lived to 900, and people are like, oh, well, that's not literal. And I'm like, well, what? I mean, how did it get to that number?
Yeah, what are we doing here?
I mean, but it's of all the things in the Bible, that, I always found that to be the most shocking thing, and nobody even gives a shit about it. It's so funny how occluded. That's why occult is such a great term. It means covered up. And it just shows, it means your mind covered up as well. It's if I was trying to give the fascination of Christianity and Jesus, to me it's an immortality cult centered around immortality, and it always was, and that's why they they crucified him, because he was preaching something just like, what? Everlasting life. Like, did he say everlasting afterlife? No. So he's saying, like, look, there's no reason why we don't have to, we can live forever. Now, I think the components of living forever are, you have to be a saint. I think that's part of it. Like, you have to be a good person. You cannot be immortal and be bad. Just doesn't work.
There's a combo of effects.
Right. But I also think that you cannot be good if you're not in the bliss state. Like, immortality requires the bliss state, because then you're in the bliss state, you always do the right thing. And even when you don't, you do the right thing in response to that. So,
well, on the physical level, in the bliss state, all your cells are lit up. I picture them like all golden and kind of electrified, and that's literally embodying the reflection of your reality is your internal. And I feel like if you can keep that root, steady, it's
the law of attraction takes over. Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, you become a magnet for good things.
Yes.
And you if you're feeling great, you become a magnet for people to feel great as well around you. That's what charisma is. Like, some people have it in a negative way, but it's like, it's the positive part of them that's shining through the negativity. It's the bliss. Like, that's what charisma is. It's like internal bliss. Some people have it like in spades. Some people like have it for like, a few years in their life, their heyday, but then they lose it. Or they never knew what it was, It was more unconscious than conscious, but they still had it, and it attracted people to them. Some people, it's drug-induced. And I don't care. It doesn't matter how you get there, as long as you realize that it doesn't have to be drug-induced. I mean, drugs help, but
it feels like a lot of those people are in those temporary bliss states just based off of how they've wanted their life to go. And in that moment, it's maybe going and down that path, but you hear, stories of billionaires and whatever. Just the common thing that, like, even super rich people are, can be super miserable. And I think about that all the time, and it's, you can obviously think, they're not being grateful for what they got. They're either taking it all rather than trying to give or whatever. But, I think the bliss state is its own, like, almost its own life. Like, I'll go back to that, like the paths, and it's like the bliss state is that one path. Everything else is every other detour ever made. And
right,
we love taking detours, and we just don't. We just haven't been taught, man. We haven't been shown.
Well, we haven't been shown that the bliss state is a doorway inside your mind. It's not out there. You're not going to get it from external worlds. You're going to get it by opening it, like opening the door in your mind. And the only way you can open the door in your mind is to be present in the moment without like the chattering mind interrupting your vision of the world. Your mind should be a tool that you use consciously, but never something that runs unconsciously. And so once you remove the unconscious chatter, you start to see the bliss. It's just right there. It's not a mysterious thing. It's just covered up. Like you were saying, the layers of emotion you have to like cut through just to get to it. It's like it's there. It's just there's this cloud of emotions just like blocking it. And that cloud of emotions is your non-conscious thought processes. So we understand that like you can't find immortality, physical immortality. Like this is anti-aging immortality to the point where it's not so much that like we have the technology right now to make us live forever and that we can like. Now, I believe that what happens is that as you walk around and stay breathing and stay in the bliss state, you start to enter a society where it does become mental fact that everybody's immortal. Even evil people. I mean, they figure out some crazy thing because if you think about it, like for evil people, being immortal is hell. It's not something that's like a good thing. For evil people, they have to go through so much hell to finally come back and realize, holy shit, like I got to straighten up. I mean, that's what hell is for, right? So your trajectory, that's the double meaning of immortality, is that you can't escape. Like, you can't die and then go away. Like, you can't commit suicide. Because if you commit suicide, you're just going to wake up tomorrow in a parallel universe where you didn't commit suicide. You know, maybe having dreamed that you did. You cannot escape. I invite people to try to blow their head off. No, I don't. But I'm just saying, if you did, guess where you'd be? You'd be right back here. You probably won't remember that you blew your head off. Now, you might end up halfway here, halfway there. The worst thing to me is, getting crippled, right? It's like you're kind of in between worlds. That's a real reminder to breathe. Like, yeah. if you become crippled, like, that's all you're here to do now. Like, it's kind of like the pressure's off you, man. Like, you can just breathe and breathe and breathe. And guess what? You might breathe so deeply that you wake up and your legs work again. Like, it's like, and you never were crippled. It could happen. I mean, you don't know what changes when your breathing gets to a certain level. You kind of feel that it's different, but you don't see the change. That's why it's really hard to teach this stuff to people, because like they won't be able to see the progress. Like, you've seen it, that's kind of why I'm interested in talking to you, because it's like you were able to see the change without seeing the miracles, because look, there's no question by doing what you've doing for 7 years and breathing deeply, you have changed not only your future, but you've also changed your past. Do you recognize that? Do you understand what I mean when I say that?
I understand the future, when you say the past, I just think of, you know, like the ancestral lineage. And
no, you've changed your past. Like your past is not static. You're the way you, we're not going in linear time from past to future. We're not.
right.
We're actually a sun that is emitting rays into the past, and emitting rays into the future, and emitting rays into the present. Right? So if the shiner
Right.
the more you shine right now in the moment, it affects your past too. Your past like changes. It's weird. Like, so it's not a static thing. It's like, oh, so some really bad shit. Let me just put it this way: some really bad shit happened to you in the past that you don't even remember now. That actually changed. Like, you affected it. Like, by being so positive now, you've actually erased that horrible thing in your past, and now you don't even remember it. Your mind is like changing with the past. So like, whenever you change something in your past, that's why, you know, people have horrible pasts. Like, you can breathe your way to change it. Like, it's not static.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the past thing that I keep referencing. It's like, I almost see it as not like kind of like you're realigning back to that singular path, but
Right.
let's just say the 7 years, all the years before I started doing this, let's just say that was the non-bliss state path. In the last 7 years, by realigning, it's like I was always on it. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Like, in the sense that in order to come to this, you had to have felt the lack of it before.
Yes.
But not only that, though, like, certain things that drove you to where you are, to where you like, let's just put it this way. If you compared the different paths of, like, the past of your person before 7 years ago, your two paths are different now. And it's hard for me to explain it, but it's just like, the past is malleable. It is, because
I think
there are parallel worlds.
It helps visualize if you think about the future at the same time when you say past. For me, at least.
Okay. I mean, let's put it like this: you acknowledge that there are different futures, right? Like, there's different parallel futures where you go this way or you go that way, right? Well, it's the same is true of the past. There were parallel paths where this horrible thing that happened to you did not happen to you. And if you're acting positively into the future, you get rewarded by certain things in your past that you didn't like getting erased. Like, either erased or justified. Either erased or like, oh, that had to happen so that I had to get to this, and you kind of see it in a different perspective.
This is how I think they're like tied together. It's like my experience this weekend with the job opportunity. It's almost as though, because, you know, that a day or two before that, I hadn't done any of my self-work just because I was out and about. But, you know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, all before that, I was working on it, and it feels like, man, I don't know, it just feels like I was very aware in that moment when I made that choice, and it almost felt like I was guided to just make that decision to stay in the bliss path, even though it looked like I was steering off, and that could have been the bliss path, but just through my own reflection and stuff, it seems like I've just been continuing on it, even though the experience, based off my previous projections of what I think like failure is, regarded that as a negative experience, and I didn't take it as like, oh, you're still on the path. I thought I like veered off the path for a day or two, when really I was just still on it because I'm back here now.
Right. Well, that's a way to. But the thing is that let's just say you really thought that you would have liked to give this thing more of a chance than you gave it. But the moment's gone, right? It's not like you can actually do that now because you didn't make the decision. Well, breathe yourself into the world where you did. Breathe yourself into the world where you gave the guy more attention, you were more open, you visualize it and breathe. And sometimes
what if I don't really want that though?
Well, if you don't, you don't. I'm just saying let's just say you did.
Okay.
You can get there, is my point. And so what does that do? That effectively changes your past, because that means that you did something different than what you did. And you can make yourself while you're acting in the future, depending on your positivity level and your breath level, you can actually like effectuate a different history for yourself as well as a different future. So that's what's crazy. It's because those paths also exist for you to go to. And that's like a tremendous power, because you're just like, hey, I can bring people back from the dead. I can change something that I did in the past. Like, instead of, I can just meditate on it and be like, I should have done this. I accept that I didn't do it. It's not like you're resisting. It's not resistance. You're just saying, I want to be in the world where I went that way. Let me see what that looks like. Let me see what that world looks like. And you just keep breathing on it, breathing on it, breathing on it. And then like one day you wake up there.
And then it turns to a dream. And the other realities turn to dreams.
The other pasts are just, you dreamed it. You didn't really, it wasn't your past. And dreams are themselves parallel universes that you're experiencing. You know, they seem so familiar. You notice how familiar they are.
Right.
Like, they don't seem like you're not like, where am I? You're like, oh yeah, I'm here, and it seems so familiar.
I'm doing this thing.
Right. And it's very familiar. And like you'll talk to people in your dream that you've never met before, that you know, like, as personally. And you'll be like, wow, that's crazy. But it's just, that's the way it is. Like, you're merging with all your other parallel selves when you're in your dream state. So you're naturally going to live some of their lives. And their lives have different pasts, because it has to. So that's the real time travel.
Well, it kind of feels like, I mean, it feels like when you were saying, you know, you can breathe your way back into that desired reality or whatever. You ever have the feeling of when you can't remember a memory, if it's a dream or if it actually happened?
Of course.
So it's like, do you think those two are intertwined somehow?
Absolutely. They are.
Yeah. I
think your memory is a tricky thing. Like, a lot of times our memories don't always match. In fact, most of the time, our memories don't match what really happened. But I think ultimately, like, if your brain didn't adjust with the miracle, you would go insane. And I think that people who do see miracles are like, they are driven insane by them to a certain extent. So it's like you should consider yourself lucky that you're not seeing these miracles that have been happening to you. Like,
what's your definition of a miracle?
I'm saying, like, yesterday you may have not been able to move your legs, but you accepted it. You took deep breaths, and then today you're walking. And that's a miracle, right? But your brain changed with the reality. So you don't think it's a miracle that you're walking, but because you don't remember that you were crippled. And that's those kind of miracles are happening all the time, especially if you're on the ascent in terms of bliss state. Those type of miracles are manifesting continually, but you're not seeing them and you're not appreciating them because you don't know that they're happening. Your brain can't see it, but they are. And there's all these, and that's how, any time you have adversity, like, and you understand that, you can kind of just say, hey, look, this doesn't even have to be real. This could be something that I breathe myself out of. Or either way, I'm going to breathe myself into a bliss state and deal with it, or I'm going to breathe myself out of it. I'm going to breathe myself.
I mean, that's exactly what psychedelics are like.
I guess.
For real, it's like you have that moment of, I can freak out right now, or I can make this a beautiful moment.
Right. And so that's where I'm headed with. But anyway, we should wrap it up here. We'll talk
all good
again.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on again. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we'll do it again. I hope that people are helped by it. And thanks for coming on, man. We'll talk soon.
All right, man. Have a great night.
You too. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
All right.